Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so that you know when live we go. Hello and welcome to our weekly session of discussion on explained section of Indian Express. The idea here is to increase our scope of coverage of current affairs for civil service examination. But in doing so, we shall not be repeating topics from DNS. Considering this, the topics that we have chosen for discussion for this week are there on your screen. Let's begin. We'll begin with this explained article, Lateral Entry into Bureaucracy, Reason, Process and the Controversy. Recently, Union Public Service Commission issued an advertisement seeking application from talented and motivated Indians who are willing to contribute towards the nation building. Actually, the application was regarding 3 posts of Joint Secretary and 27 Director posts in central government departments. And the individuals getting through the process for these seats will said to have done a lateral entry into the administration. Their contract will be for 3 to 5 years. And for contractual jobs, reservation policy does not apply. This topic of lateral entry is hot topic for mains examination since 2017. But lately it has gained more traction and heat after Prime Minister openly reprimanding bureaucrats in the parliament. Also, civil services has been mentioned in the syllabus very prominently. In the syllabus of GS paper 2 under governance section you will find this topic, role of civil services in our democracy. So let's begin from the beginning. First of all, lateral entry is the direct induction of any domain expert, any specialist at middle or senior levels of administration, bypassing the regular recruitment process. There is one very important document that you must go through before the coming mains examination. That is 3-year action agenda by Niti Aayog. It was released in 2017, but the recommendations given there are still relevant today. This 3-year action agenda of Niti Aayog, and apart from that, there are various committee recommendations and reports. For instance, one is that of Sectoral Group of Secretaries on Governance. They recommended inclusion of personnel at middle and senior management in the central government through lateral entries. The thing is that government time and again already uses experts from the private sector. If you talk about recent time, you must have heard of Mr. Param Iyer. He was an IAS officer, then he left the service, and after 17 years he came back and led the Swachh Bharat mission, and he was the man largely responsible for the success. The first vice chairman to Niti Aayog, Mr. Arvind Panagria, Mr. Shankaracharya, Arvind Subramaniam, these former chief economist advisors, they all have been roped in from private sector. But the thing is, when government call experts, specialists from the private domain, they don't join the service. The practice so far has been that they come and serve people, participate in governance administration, and they occupy certain posts only for a certain period of time. They don't get integrated into the administration. In contrast to this, the lateral entry that we are talking about, that is an institutionalized mechanism of integrating specialists and experts into all India service or the central services. They will become part of central secretariat, which so far has been done only by career bureaucrats. Although so far government has been offering these administrative posts at senior position for 3 to 5 years. But the idea of lateral entry is going to become a mechanism in which the experts from the private domain will be recruited actually into all India services and central civil services. And this practice of lateral recruitment already exists in many countries like US, Belgium, UK, Australia, New Zealand and many other European countries. They have institutionalized this mechanism as a permanent feature of their system. Since they have properly institutionalized it, there are examination entrance tests that are taken and objective criteria on which the selection will be done. Since this idea of lateral entry in an institutionalized manner is quite new in India, so the conditions, criteria, recruitment method has not been properly, objectively in a transparent manner laid down. But as we progress further and adopt and adapt this mechanism, perhaps the system will become more defined later. But to develop this system in a proper manner, we need to have conviction of benefits that this lateral entry mechanism will bring in the process of governance. The first and foremost objective of lateral entry mechanism is to bring specialists, domain experts in the process of governance in the business of policy making. The debate of generalist versus specialist is as old as governance itself. But lately it has been realized that it is good to have some specialists in the process of policy making and its implementation, because certain areas like finance, information technology, transport infrastructure development, even education adopting new technologies, the process of laying out and adopting 5G technology, artificial intelligence, all these requires a specialized knowledge. The need of a specialist in administration and higher position was felt very early, and this was highlighted by the first Administrative Reform Commission back in 1965. Thereafter, Surendranath Committee in 2003, Hota Committee in 2004, even the second Administrative Reform Commission in 2006, they all highlighted this need. It also has been suggested that entry of a specialist through lateral entry will improve the quality of bureaucracy. It will increase its efficiency because it will bring in more competitiveness in the system. There is a 2014 report of World Bank on quality of civil service measurement, and there India ranks 46th, which deteriorated from 1999 ranking, which was 35. One way of improving the ranking, the quality of bureaucracy, apart from taking other systemic reform, would be to increase competition in the system. And this was recommended by Y.K. Alagh Committee in 2001. Without competition, there is very little incentive for civil servant to improve their skills. Further, the career progression of civil servant is almost automatic because it is based on seniority. So apart from bringing fresh talent, fresh ideas in the system, lateral entry mechanism will also induce competition in the system. And this has been much stressed by the Niti Aayog's plan document, the 3-year action agenda 2017 to 20. The proponents of lateral entry in civil services also highlight that many of the outstanding work in nation building has been done by experts from private sector. For instance, the telecommunication revolution is credited to Mr. Sam Pitroda. You know, the father of white revolution in India, Mr. Verghese Kurien. The father of green revolution in India, Mr. M.S. Swaminathan. Space research, space technology in India was propelled by Vikram Sarabhai. The Grameen Bank revolution that was carried out in Bangladesh, which has impact in India and other countries in Asia and globally, that was done by Muhammad Yunus. All these were domain experts. Government recognized the talent and made good use of it for public service and nation building. So lateral entry will only be an institutional mechanism to harness this talent in the private sector. Lateral entry could also be a mechanism to fill the vacancy in the civil services. According to a report of Ministry of Personal Public Grievances and Pension, there is a shortage of nearly 1500 IS officers. There is almost 20% vacancy at IS level. This huge shortfall in the IS cadre was recognized by Baswan Committee in 2016. It also has been pointed out that the IAS training center in Mussoorie that has limitation of training only fixed number of IAS officers, that ceiling cannot be breached there, and that is acting as a bottleneck in the recruitment process. This problem can be overcome by lateral entry. It also has been suggested that recruitment of IAS officers at very young age makes it difficult to test their potential administrative and judgment capabilities. At the recruitment stage, a potential candidate may be identified, but it may happen that he may fail to make it to a good administrator. And one who do not make it to the recruitment exam may potentially show higher administrative skill at latter stage. So the talent pool that was lost by UPSC at the recruitment phase, that can be tapped again through lateral entry. But it won't be easy to earn all these benefits for the system. The most important challenge that the government will face in recruitment through lateral entry would be the orientation of the officers. Private sectors are mostly profit oriented, but the purpose of governance, the motive of government is public service. And this is a huge problem the officers will face. Some of them may even fail to transit their basic orientation idea from being profit oriented towards public service. For instance, to give you one example, you would remember the spat between Cyrus Mistry and the Tatas. The problem was rooted in the style of working of Mr. Cyrus Mistry, who was getting inclined towards more and more profit, looking at things more professionally. And that working style was lacking coherence with the work culture that Tatas have developed since years. It may become very difficult for people coming from private sector to comprehend as to why government is taking some of the steps even at financial loss. The higher purpose of public service may sometimes get elusive. Another problem would be the question of political accountability of bureaucrats. You know, the way the democracy works, ministers are directly responsible. If something goes wrong, they ought to come and take responsibility for mishappenings. Civil servants always work in the background. Direct responsibility do not come to them. But civil servants are responsible to their political heads. The review of their work, the question of transfer and posting, promotion, those are decided by the political heads. But if a person is getting into the system for a very short period, 3 to 5 years through lateral entry, then it may get difficult to ensure political accountability of such a person. Because he is there in the system for a very short period of time and then he is going to go. So the political control is not going to be there. So if political heads are not going to have control over the actions of bureaucrats who is going to be in the system for a very short period of time, then how will those political heads take responsibility for any mishappening or in general be answerable to people? With power comes responsibility. Responsibility cannot be bereft of power to administer. So this theory of governance of direct responsibility of politicians and political accountability of civil servants will be difficult to implement. Additionally, lateral entry have been began to be implemented only at higher levels. But given the multiple links and the chain of command in governance, in bureaucracy, in administration, beginning from union government right till local governance at village level, the utility of lateral entry will depend on how government is going to leverage the expertise of the new entrant and how enabling situation using other reforms in the system has been created so that a person sitting at the top level will be able to have some impact. As we have talked about in the beginning, there is no reservation policy for contractual work. And presently how the mechanism of lateral entry is being implemented, the reservation policy is not associated with that. So there is a threat that as this mechanism will gain steam and more civil servants are going to be recruited through lateral entry at higher level, government is going to disband the reservation policy. And that may give rise to the constitutional questions. There is another very important question related with lateral entry. When you work in private sector, you are not required to be politically neutral. But in bureaucracy, in civil services, this is of utmost high value. Fairness, impartiality, neutrality, these are foundational values of civil services. And this is tested in the administrators very young at the stage of recruitment and thereafter, and the system tries to develop these values through training. But when a person is coming at a higher age to the higher position, how are you going to develop this value at that stage if it is not there? It is increasingly becoming clear that we are going to adopt lateral entry only to a higher extent with passage of time. So it becomes imperative that the system, the mechanism we are going to adopt, put in place, they must answer these critical questions. Hand in hand, I must tell you that lateral entry is only one of the civil service reform that government has recently taken up. And as we have discussed, lateral entry alone is not going to work unless there is holistic change in the system, unless the system is ready, unless the system is receptive to new ideas, ready for change, not showing inertia. And to achieve these goals, government has taken up other reforms as well. For example, PMO has asked various ministries to give list of officers for compulsory retirement, those officers who are not performing well. An extreme measure of compulsorily retiring 30 IRS officers was taken recently. DOPT is required to maintain the list of officers who are underperforming. Central government has adopted the mechanism of 360-degree appraisal for better review of work of civil servants. Some of the states, like recently Punjab, has constituted civil service board that will recommend the transfer and postings of IAS officers. In 2013, Supreme Court mandated the formation of civil service boards in each of the state and also at the center to insulate the civil services from political interference. But many of the states still does not have this board and many of them have not made it properly functional. Central government also has worked to remove the VIP culture associated with bureaucracy. With 7th Pay Commission, pay scale for the civil services has become handsome. Rules according to the Code of Conduct for Civil Services like declaration of asset. These helps in resolving the conflict of interest that a bureaucrat may face. Apart from these steps that are being taken by the government, some of the recommendations of 2nd ARC are still relevant. For example, the Commission recommended for National Institute of Public Administration. When the officers are coming through lateral entry, the importance of this institute will be even more to integrate those officers in the work culture of civil service and orient them for public services. 2nd ARC also recommended that promotion must not only be on basis of seniority, but on completion of mandatory training programs so that specialized knowledge, requisite skills are progressively developed among bureaucrats. 2nd ARC also recommended some minimum tenure for senior civil servants that will give safeguard against arbitrary dismissal of civil servants. And to take it further, Supreme Court in 2013 ordered Constitution of Civil Service Board. That was done in TSR Subramaniam versus Union of India case. All, in conclusion, I'll say two things. Number one, lateral entry is a small part of the overall civil service reform that is needed. And number two, lateral entry must be done in the manner and the way in which the work culture, political accountability, and the greater goal of public service is maintained. So it is important that recruitment is done in an objective manner. The next article that we are going to take up is concerning Haryana's local workforce policy that has been recently cleared by the state cabinet. The state of Haryana has prepared a Haryana State Employment of Local Candidates Ordinance 2020 and it has been cleared by the state cabinet. The main provision of this ordinance is that 75% of new employment to local candidates for jobs having salary less than rupees 50,000 per month in various privately managed companies, including situated in the state of Haryana. Apart from private companies, this norm will also apply to societies, trust, limited liability partnership firms, etc. There is another important thing that you must take note regarding this ordinance. The employers will have the option to recruit local candidates from one district only up to 10%. The idea is to distribute this benefit all over the state. However, there would be exemption to this clause if suitable candidates are not available from a particular category. It will have administrative and legal difficulty to be implemented, but before that we shall discuss whether this policy, this ordinance will stand the constitutional and legal scrutiny. As of today, there are several states that have enacted laws to provide reservation for their local residents in private sector. Like Maharashtra has the provision of up to 80% quota, Karnataka 75%, Andhra Pradesh 75%, Madhya Pradesh 70%. But on validity of these laws, we are not sure yet. Various petitions challenging these laws are pending before Supreme Court and some of the high courts. So we are awaiting an authoritative judgment from the apex court on the matter. Your final opinion on the issue must be built on the judgment that Supreme Court will ultimately give. Here in our discussion, we shall look at 1. The implication of such a policy, and 2. The prospect of this policy, the ordinance, to stand the legal and the constitutional scrutiny. So it will be some kind of revision of the provisions of Constitution and the Supreme Court's previous judgments that you must already be knowing. First of all, this ordinance of Haryana can be challenged before the court on the ground of being violative of Article 19(1)(g), which states that all citizens have right to practice any profession or to carry out any occupation, trade or business anywhere in the nation. The private firms can actually claim that the law effectively interferes with their constitutional rights to carry on their trades freely. Such a policy is also said to be violative of Article 14 of the Constitution, which ensures equality before the law equal protection of the laws within territory of India. When you go on to Article 15, the discussion gets even better. Article 15.1 and Article 15.2 prohibits the state from discriminating against any citizen on ground of religion, race, caste, sex, and place of birth. But however, Clause 3 to Clause 9 of Article 15 empowers the state to provide for positive discrimination in favor of grossly underrepresented and neglected sections of the society to promote substantive equality. See, Article 15 empowers the state to make special provisions for women and children. And Article 15.4 authorizes the state to make special provisions for advancement of socially and educationally backwards or SC/STs. So 15.4 clearly mandates the state to make special provision for advancement of socially and educationally backwards. If you read Article 15.5, it goes one step even further and says that the state can reserve admission into educational institutions, including private schools or colleges, whether or not aided by the government. So for substantive equality, the state can do positive discrimination. If you go further, read Article 16.1, it says that the state cannot discriminate against any citizen in the matters of employment. Likewise, if you read Article 16.2, it too makes it clear that no citizen shall only on the ground of religion, race, caste, sex, descent, place of birth, residence, or any of these criteria be ineligible for or discriminated against in respect of any employment or office under the state. But at the same time, the clause 3 of Article 16 allows who? Allows Parliament. Remember, it allows Parliament to make any law with regard to residence qualifications necessary for government jobs by introducing the domicile-based preferential treatment. So the laws regarding domicile, making it a criteria for employment, that is the exclusive domain of Parliament, coming from Article 16.3. Further, Article 16.4 allows the state to reserve employment for any backward class of citizens, which in the opinion of the state is not adequately represented in services. And this determination, whether they are adequately represented or not, state is the sole authority for that. In Trikoli Nath case, Supreme Court held that the issue of determination by the state as to whether a particular class of citizen is backward or not is not justifiable. The same was reiterated again in 2018, where the Supreme Court said that states were not required to collect any quantifiable data reflecting the backwardness among communities for the purpose of reservation. So it may seem like the states can come up with laws putting the domicile criteria for employment, and they don't have to give any quantifiable data for that. The call of the state on the matter is final. But there's a big but. That power is drawn from Article 16.3, and that is the domain of Parliament. Whatever we are talking about here, that is true, that is the power of Parliament. The states do not have this power. Now let's see some of the Supreme Court judgment to judge whether the allocation of 75% seats to locals in employment will stand the legal and constitutional scrutiny or not. In 2002, in Govind A. Mane vs. State of Maharashtra case, the Supreme Court quashed the state's decision to distribute seats district-wise for admission to B.Ed course. The court said that allocation based on residence would be violative of Article 14. In the beginning, I highlighted this point that this ordinance of state government of Haryana kind of reserves seats for all districts in saying that the recruiter cannot recruit local candidates from one district more than 10%. But allocation of seats district-wise has been quashed by Supreme Court already. In fact, allocation of seats region-wise also has been quashed by Supreme Court back in 1986 in Nidamarti Mahesh Kumar versus State of Maharashtra case. There the state was looking for classifications for admission to medical colleges, region-wise classification, on ground that Vidarbha and Marathwada regions are backward compared to Pune and Bombay region. But Supreme Court did not accept any such contention, saying that region cannot be exclusive categories. Similarly, Supreme Court yet again in Uttar Pradesh versus Pradeep Tandon case rejected the plea of the state government to reserve certain seats in favor of candidates from rural areas. Supreme Court observed that the reservation for rural areas cannot be sustained on the ground that rural areas represent socially and educationally backward classes of citizens. Remember 15.4, which authorizes the state to make special provision for advancement of socially and educationally backwards. Supreme Court said that 15.4 cannot be applied to rural areas because then the incident of birth in rural area would be made a basic qualification and no reservation can be made on the basis of place of birth according to Article 15 itself. In Dr. Pradeep Jain versus Union of India case 1984, Supreme Court specifically dealt with the issue of domicile-based reservation. Supreme Court said that to regard an individual from one state as an outsider in another state would be to deny him his constitutional rights and to de-recognize the essential unity and integrity of the country by treating it as if it were a mere conglomeration of independent states. In 1995, in Sunanda Reddy versus the state of Andhra Pradesh, Supreme Court reiterated what was said in Dr. Pradeep Jain case. Supreme Court struck down the state government policy to give 5% extra weightage to candidates who had studied in Telugu medium. Many of the states still today, they take language test for employment, like Maharashtra also takes. And that indirectly is to give regional preference in employment. But this open policy of giving 5% extra weightage, this was struck down. Supreme Court in 2002 in Kailash Chand Sharma versus the state of Rajasthan held that the measures taken by the state on consideration of localism was not sanctioned by the constitutional mandate of equality. If we summarize the constitutional and legal issues concerning the recent policy of Haryana state government to give 75% reservation to locals in employment in the state in the private sector, there are three of them. Number one, the state through this law is exercising a power exclusively within the domain of parliament. Coming from Article 16.3. There could be a law having domicile-based reservation. That power is there in Article 16.3. But that power can be exercised obviously only by parliament. State governments cannot come up with such law. Then there is the issue of breaching 50% ceiling on reservation that Supreme Court again and again through various judgment has established. Beginning from Indra Sawhney judgment, then to the Nagraj judgment. Then there are obvious and direct conflict with the fundamental rights of citizens. Coming from Article 14, 15, 16, Article 19. Apart from the constitutional and legal question, there will be obvious economic implication if such policies by the state government will be upheld by the apex court. See, Economic Survey 2016-17 tells us that the annual work-related interstate migration has increased to around 9 million. And the survey had very positive outlook about interstate migration because it benefits the economy. In the last explained discussion, we discussed the draft national policy on migrant workers prepared by Niti Aayog, and this policy said migration should be acknowledged as an integral part of development. Government policies must not hinder but facilitate internal migration. Back in 2017, there was a committee called as Working Group on Migration that was set up by the then Ministry of Housing and Urban Poverty Alleviation, and this committee argued that movement from agriculture to manufacturing and then to services was inherently linked to the success of migration in the country. If you start reserving seats for locals and not allow the opportunity for migrants, then the internal migration will be hurt. We shall not be able to optimally harness our demographic dividend. Further, if you come to think about it, private organizations, they mostly are profit driven. And they look for the best of the talent in any salary bracket. And 50,000 is not less. The best of the talents as new recruits will lie in this salary bracket. So the companies may start circumventing this law, this policy by showing the place of residence of their employees as UP or Delhi. Such policy will develop a strong sons of soil sentiment and negative sentiment towards migrants, thus affecting the overall miasma of cooperative federalism. In a multilinguistic society like India, the unrestricted work-related migration has the potential to emerge as a unifying force. It enables healthy interaction among people of different language, different region, different culture. So in Dr. Pradeep Jain case versus Union of India in 1984, Supreme Court rightly observed, sons of the soil claim, though not altogether illegitimate, if confined within reasonable bounds, but they are breaking the unity and integrity of the nation by fostering and strengthening narrow parochial loyalties based on language and residence within a state. I am not concluding this discussion, nor should you. We have just discussed the issues revolving around such a policy. How many of them will settle down? That will be decided by Supreme Court's final verdict on the issue. And then you will write the conclusion for this issue.
The next article that we are going to take up is this: the debate over a Chinese divorce court ordering housework compensation for a woman. Recently, a Chinese divorce court has really given a landmark judgment after enforcement of the new civil code in China. The court has ordered a man to compensate his ex-wife for the housework that she did in the 5 years of marriage. The new civil code of China stipulates that if one spouse is burdened with additional duties for raising children or looking after the elderly or assisting the other spouse in his or her work, then the said spouse has the right to request for compensation upon divorce against the other spouse, and the latter party shall make due compensation. There are few things that you must pick up here right away. First of all, this is gender neutral. It is applicable to both the spouses. Second of all, this is not a state-sponsored compensation. The compensation will come from one spouse to another. Third of all, this is not strictly the compensation for unpaid domestic and care work, because the compensation is going to be given only after divorce. But here we shall have a discussion broadly on the specific issue of compensating women for unpaid domestic and care work, not just after divorce, but in general always. In India, we do not have a code for compensating women for household work, but courts have very innovatively, informally have developed wages for household jurisprudence. This has been done through various cases and using various legislation. Just to give you an example, in Baljeet versus Kashmir Singh case, court used Motor Vehicle Act 1988 to compensate women for household work. Wife of Mr. Baljeet died, and according to the Motor Vehicle Act 1988, some compensation has to be given to the family of deceased. The claim was that the deceased used to do tailoring and knitting work and she used to earn 2,000 per month. But it was difficult to establish her income and they could not do it in the court. But court then considered deceased as housewife and assessed the notional monthly earning of the deceased as rupees 1,000. And most importantly, they used a multiplier factor of 16, meaning they multiplied the income by 16. This effectively was in recognition of the household work that housewives do. Also, International Labour Organization has recognized the National Rural Employment Guarantee Act of 2005 as a legislation that recognized women's unpaid work burden. See, generally 90% of women workers are farm laborers or cultivators. So a substantial part of their work is unpaid because they work in their own farms. Manrega has to a certain extent changed this. Now part of women's non-paid job like land leveling and digging a pond in their farm and work like that are paid for. This has made their unpaid work more visible. But however, having a code for compensating household work of women is very difficult because the nature of work is such. ILO defines unpaid work as non-remunerated work carried out to sustain the well-being and maintenance of other individuals in the household or the community, and it includes both direct and indirect care. So having a code for compensation will raise many questions, beginning from what will be the mechanism, the methodology to quantify this unpaid work and hence to compensate them. Then more importantly, where the money will come from. Will it be compensated from the pocket of the spouse or the government will subsidize it? There will also be a question of universal basic income very much attached to this, because the compensation must also go to men who are involved in household works. And if we have the concept of universal basic income, then compensating women separately will not be necessary. Then the policy also must decide whether unmarried men and women will be compensated. And what about the rich housewives who have servants working for her and her family already? We also must discuss if the family laws, the civil codes, they need to be changed for compensating women. The question of transgender women that also needs to be addressed. Will they get the benefit of women's compensation for household work? Any major policy decision must have impact assessment. We have to debate and discuss any unintended consequence of compensating women for household works.
However, if women are compensated in monetary terms for unpaid domestic and care work, that will give recognition to their work. And simple recognition of the work they perform, the importance of their role in the family, that will enhance their social status. And even if the compensation is very less, they are given very basic salary, still their bargaining power in terms of economic decision making and otherwise in the household will increase. And when the social status and economic status will increase, they will have greater endurance to resist domestic violence. Whatever small economic compensation they'll get, that can be used to learn a new skill. It will increase their mobility. They'll have greater control on their life. And if need be, if the marriage didn't work out, if there is lots of suffering and pain in it, then they can exit the marriage. In the 2011 census, people engaged in household duties have been treated as non-workers, even when 159.9 million women stated that household work was their main occupation. Many economists suggest that if these household works are included as work in economic sense, then we can do more accurate national income accounting. It will also help increase the data for female labor force participation rate. As you would know that female labor force participation rate is increasingly decreasing in India. But females are busy participating in household work. It's just that that work is not being counted. National Statistical Office recently conducted the time use survey for the first time in India for the period January to December 2019. According to the survey, on an average, 19.5% of women's time goes to unpaid domestic or caregiving work. Correspondingly, this time for men is only 2.5%. And if you look in terms of employment and related activity, this is almost reverse. For men it is 18.3%, for women it is 4.2%. The percentage of time that goes on for learning, developing new skill is also more for men, 7.1%. For female it is 5.8%. For socialization, men spend more time. So lesser time spent on economic activities and lesser time given for self-learning is a big issue. It leads to time poverty for women. Because time poverty undermines women's agency, their productivity, their bargaining power, their ability to make choices. However, there are many arguments against making the household work as paid. First and foremost, it is suggested that this will further strengthen gender stereotyping in our society. It will further compartmentalize the social roles of men and women in society. And there is a risk that we will further go in the direction of patriarchy. The sociological concept of patriarchy is based on the idea that male are the breadwinner for the family. Women have to stay at home and manage the household chores. So paying for the household work may not only strengthen patriarchy, but it may further make it difficult for women to shift to normal paid employment in economic marketplace. This idea may also have some other more serious unintended effect. It may increase the male sense of entitlement. putting additional onus on women to perform. Imagine a scenario where husband is shouting कि roti क्यों जल गई despite I am paying for the service. To pay for the household work, to treat your wife as a service provider could be disastrous for personal relationship and for family values. Apart from that, we understand that the legal enforcement will also be difficult. We have already provisions related with women empowerment, for example, equal inheritance rights. But these rights continue to be elusive for majority of women. And then the big economic question, who is going to bear the cost? The husband or the government? If the government is to bear the cost or even to subsidize the major chunk of it, it is going to put financial burden. But however, many countries and even middle income countries like Venezuela, they compensate women for unpaid domestic and care work. Venezuela compensates with 80% of the minimum wage. In Uruguay, they have a Care Act, according to which all children, persons with disabilities, and elderly person, they have right to get care. So if all children has the right to get care, then mother giving care to child, she is entitled for compensation. But to look on the other side, Sweden is a very good case study. Sweden in 2007 introduced subsidies to domestic chores. And at that point in time, Sweden topped the gender equality index. 13 years after, we are in position to evaluate this step of Sweden. But now we know that those women who opted for subsidies reported more hours of earned income. Meaning when you are being given subsidy, you are working more. So as such, the burden on women has not decreased, even though they are being compensated for it. Additionally, we also gain insight with regard to gender stereotyping. Such measures have no substantial effect on gender stereotyping in society because in Sweden, the employed domestic workers are largely women. But there is no doubting the fact that the burden of domestic chores largely come on women, and they must be freed from it for them to act as an agency and be self-dependent. And this burden must decrease for women's status socially, economically, politically to improve. Visionaries like Kasiram, Periyar, they wanted women to free themselves from the domestic chores. This was the way to challenge patriarchy in society. But such measure will only be one step in several steps to be taken to achieve the aim of gender equality in society. Other ancillary measures that will reduce stereotyping, that will strengthen women's bargaining power, improve their status in family and society must also be undertaken. For instance, institutionalizing women's right to property and co-ownership of any asset that is purchased by the couple. Presently, the asset, the ownership is in the name of husband or whomsoever he wishes. It is only after divorce that women can lay claim on it. But the idea of co-ownership will give the due importance to women and will also be in recognition to the value of unpaid work that women do. Now we will take up this explained article, Pixxel India's delayed flight to new space frontier. ISRO started the calendar of this year's launch by launching bunch of 19 satellites using PSLV C-51. 5 satellites were from India, 13 from US, and one important satellite was Amazonia 1 of Brazil. In the DNS of 1st March 2021, we discussed this launch, we discussed about Amazonia 1, we discussed about Earth Observation Satellite, we also discussed India-Brazil relation, and we also discussed about Amazon forest in general. But what we didn't discuss then, and what we are going to discuss slightly now, is the missed satellite of Pixxel India. This Bangalore-based space tech startup has planned a vast constellation of Earth imaging satellites that will monitor every part of the globe. And the first satellite of this constellation, termed as Anand, was to be launched along the 19 satellites that were launched using the rocket launcher PSLV C-51 on 28th February. However, due to certain software related issues during the testing stage, the satellite was not launched.
because the time and effort that has gone into building the satellite will be worth only if satellite is launched after satisfactory testing. When the time comes and Anand will get finally launched, you will get to read about it and also about the wider issue of private sector participation in India's space technological sector. For now, you must be aware of the ground that has been laid for private sector participation. First and foremost, recently government has established in space Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center. This body is going to act as a single point interface between ISRO and anyone who wants to participate in space related activities or use India's space resources. This will act as an administrative body and also regulatory body that will do hand-holding, promote and guide private industries in space activities through making policies amenable to private sector and friendly regulatory environment. Government also has established Indian National Space Promotion Board. It has been set up to strengthen the Department of Space for the promotion of private space entrepreneurs or non-government space entrepreneurs. Basically, it has been set up to strengthen Department of Space for the purpose of promotion of private space entrepreneurs, or to say the non-governmental space entrepreneurs. Government also has established a new commercial arm of ISRO, New Space India Limited. The purpose is to reorient space activities in India from working from a supply-driven model to demand-driven model. Till now, India's private space industry's role has been mainly that of suppliers of components and subsystems. Indian industries do not have the resources or the technology to undertake independent space projects like that taken in US. Additionally, the need for satellite data, imageries and space technology now cut across sectors from weather to agriculture to transport. Hence, the main objective of in India's space program. This policy aims to regulate the and also the ground stations for communication needs. The policy also details out as to how the private players are going to get authorization There are few private sector space companies in India that are now building launching pads, just like the satellite launching pad we have at Sriharikota. It's important that private sector participation increases to capitalize on this opportunity and also to free up ISRO to take up larger role in research activities. And it is also going to be a topic that will become more and more important. With this, we have come to the end of discussion for this week. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Take care.